Hi. So I've just watched a very good film, The Water Diviner, directed and starring Russell Crowe. It's one of his better performances, I have to say. Also co-stars Olga Kurylenko. It's a film about a man set in 1919, just after the First World War, but in the midst of the Turkish War of Independence. A man who goes to Turkey to find his missing three sons who supposedly fell at Gallipoli. It was a very powerful film, and I'd strongly recommend it. That's got nothing to do with this video. I'm just saying it in passing. Okay, so I want to amalgamate a few different subjects in this one. I'm not even sure what title I'm going to give this video at the moment, but basically it's about the fundamental issue of freedom, right? Um, Specifically thinking of freedom of expression in the United Kingdom in 2020. Now, there's a lot of angles to look at with this, so I'm going to condense it somewhat. But recently I heard reports that the journalist Darren Grimes, who I don't know much about, but he interviewed Professor David Starkey, who is now basically in a wilderness because he made flippant comments regarding racism, or regarding slavery rather. And they were crass comments, but it wasn't enough for Starkey to apologize. He subsequently lost all his academic connections. At the same time, Dr. Priyamvada Gopal made racist comments at Cambridge University. She got praised. So I don't think we can look at these issues without looking at double standards between, for example, a white man and an Indian woman. In that case, both make racist comments. One gets penalized, the other doesn't. So there's obvious double standards. Recently, the actor Lawrence Fox has announced he is launching a new political party, Reclaim, which has been described as sort of fighting the culture wars. Um, and it's been erroneously compared to the Brexit Party. That's a bit misleading. Fox was actually voted Remain. Um, I think there's people trying to pigeonhole Fox as just another right-wing populist. Um, but the truth of the matter is, if you look at his politics, they probably veered to the centre. That's probably why I'm interested in him. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with everything Fox says, but I think the very fact that he is willing to stand up against this woke dogma is intriguing. It's intriguing. I'm not saying I'm about to, jump in and support this new party, but I'll be watching developments. I'm interested in it. Let's put it that way. He recently said he was going to, and I don't know the full details of this, but he took issue with, I think it was Sainsbury's celebrating Black History Month. Although, as he put it, it's not so much that they're celebrating Black History Month, it's that they want to create a safe space, which he felt was a path to segregation. Now, I think that him taking issue with that is very different from cancel culture. That's his personal view. He's not calling on others to cancel Sainsbury's or to boycott Sainsbury's, as far as I know. Um, Fox isn't a politician. He's an actor, so that's not the background he comes from. But I think he's on to something, and I think he's tapping into what a lot of people feel in this country. But they are particularly in the arts. There's very, very few other actors, even if they agree with Fox, would be willing to say the things that he says. And it's incredible the year that he's had. But this is a lot bigger than one man. Although, I do find some of the things he says refreshing and interesting. This actually goes beyond that. So I mentioned that journalist Darren Grimes, who's now supposedly been threatened with arrest. I don't know if he's been arrested, but he's supposedly being told that he could be arrested over interviewing David Starkey. So we're now in a situation if a journalist interviews someone who might be outspoken and says something controversial, then the journalists themselves could find themselves in, in hot water simply for reporting it or airing it. That is extremely disturbing. Think about that for a second. We're talking about the United Kingdom. We're not talking about Turkey or Egypt or China or another country that is notorious for attacks on press freedom. We're talking about the UK here. I find that chilling. Um, but I think it's important to be wary of those who use offence and sensitivities as a way to cloak their supposed virtues. What I mean by that is some of the most outspoken virtue signalers around, you know, people who are really, really vocal when it comes to racial equality and gender equality, that's fine. But more often than not, those people have absolutely no problem with, for example, what is being threatened against Darren Grimes, and they'll find angles to justify it. Um, I'm not a free speech absolutist, I should make that clear. I don't, for example, believe that people have a right to threaten others. I don't believe people have a right to bully others. So, for example, I can't make a video just naming and shaming someone and encouraging my subscribers to bully them. That would be an abusive speech. So, I'm not a free speech absolutist. I want to be clear about that. And I don't believe that absolute freedom exists. I think some libertarians have this view we should all be allowed to do whatever we want. I think that's both naive and reckless. Wrong. Because all societies, all countries, all people have a certain set of rules that they follow. But I think there is an international conflict between the extent of freedom and the extent of totalitarianism. And if we are not careful, we could go down a totalitarian path. Now, people might think, oh, that'll never happen in Britain. But, and this might sound like hyperbole, but 1930s Germany, it was a developed Western country. Look what happened. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to have an equivalent of the Third Reich. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think in recent years there has been a troubling descent of freedom of expression. Often it's been assaulted by creeping legislation that's supposedly about protecting minorities, but when you really scrutinise it, does raise some uncomfortable questions. An example of this would be the recent proposed hate crime legislation in Scotland, which, if left unchecked, could make it very difficult to criticise religion. That's chilling. And as a result, its proponents have had to water it down, as they should. But we can't be complacent. We can't just think that because on the surface we have freedom of speech, and we do. I mean, clearly we have more freedom than people have in other countries, right? Because the very fact that I'm making this video shows that. But I don't know that further down the line that certain subjects will become so taboo. I mean, for example, it may become illegal to use the wrong pronoun with transgender people. As it stands, it's quite a sensitive issue. But it may actually get to the point where legislation is framed in such a way, supposedly to, for example, protect transgender people. What it's actually doing is saying that if a woman like J.K. Rowling says that she believes in biology, she could be guilty of hate crime. I think we're going down that path. I think it's obvious with the transgender issue, but I think it can be seen also with religion, particularly Islam. Um, Basically, what this all points to is that freedom isn't free, and the extent of freedom of expression in this country may not be as broad reaching as we think. I always find it troubling when people. There was a police officer, actually, I believe he was from Hull, who was investigated over supposedly transphobic comments. I think it is very, very troubling when police forces use resources to go to people's homes and question them over comments that they've made on the internet. Now, obviously, if someone's making explicit threats, that should be taken seriously. And I don't think you joke about threats. But we are seeing a situation where people are increasingly finding themselves questioned or scrutinized over thoughts, comments that may be controversial or politically incorrect. And I do think that partly it's government legislation, but I do question police forces who prioritize this and then they take a long time to respond to some violent thug. Makes you wonder where their priorities are. And I think police chiefs need to answer to that, why they're putting such priority in trying to prosecute or, visit someone's home who supposedly said something online. You know, people shouldn't be obnoxious for the sake of it. Bullying is a horrible thing. I hate bullies, so I would never downplay or trivialize bullying. By the same token, though, I'm very, very wary of sensitivity being used as a way to allow kind of creeping legislation or police overreach. We need to be very, very careful here. And I do think there are some signs that we are going down the wrong path. We're not quite there yet. I think enough common sense prevailed. But when I hear about police, knocking someone's door because they've said something on the internet, when I hear about legislation being proposed that might make it difficult to criticize religion, which is very different from hating religious adherents, um, when I hear about journalists being arrested because their subject said something controversial, or at least being threatened with arrest, as in Darren Grimes' case, it has to raise questions. And those of us who really, really do believe in democracy and freedom need to question it. And the key is the ability to defend those that we disagree with. So if you're of a right wing persuasion, you need to have the ability to defend left wing opinion. If you're of a left wing persuasion, you need to have the ability to defend conservative or right wing opinion that you don't agree with. Not defend it as in agree with it, but defend the right to have it. And I do worry that there are people out there who relish the idea of their opponents being arrested. Now, I don't want to exaggerate here. We're not in a situation in the UK where dozens of people are being arrested for having the wrong views. We're not there yet, but I do think that, for example, compared to maybe 20 years ago, I do think that freedom of expression has eroded in this country um, under the guise of benevolence. It needs to be scrutinized. Um, and it's troubling. Let me know your thoughts.